The audition that changed it all. She arrived in New York with $35 in her pocket and a conviction stronger than the city's skyline. It was 1978. The streets were rough, the dreams were big, and the world didn't seem to care about another skinny girl with stars in her eyes. But Madonna Louise Ciccone, she wasn't looking for the world's permission. She came to take it. She crashed on friends' couches, worked late-night shifts at Dunkin' Donuts, posed for questionable photography gigs, and danced like her life depended on it. Because it did. The city wasn't kind. New York didn't hand out second chances. Sometimes, not even first. But there she was, audition after audition, rejection after rejection, until one room changed everything. It wasn't a glamorous stage or a red carpet callback. It was a dimly lit rehearsal space in the East Village. No one knew her name. No one cared. And yet, when the music started, she moved like she had nothing to prove and everything to lose. She didn't just dance. She commanded the floor, like her body was telling the story of every woman who had ever been silenced, every girl who was told to sit down, be nice, smile more. Madonna didn't smile. She stared the room down, daring it to look away. The choreographer, a former Broadway dancer with years of ego and scars, didn't expect much, but 10 seconds in, he leaned forward. 30 seconds in, he forgot to breathe. At the 1-minute mark, he knew this wasn't just a dancer. This was a woman about to break the rules. After the audition, silence. The kind of silence that feels like judgment, but also like awe. She didn't wait for applause. She grabbed her bag and walked out, because she already knew she got the part. But more importantly, she had just made the city say her name. That night, she walked 30 blocks home. It was cold. Her boots had holes. Her stomach was empty, but her eyes were on fire. She knew this was the beginning, but she also knew something else. That this city, this industry, this machine would try to mold her, break her, tame her. And she swore it would fail. This wasn't a girl chasing fame. This was a rebellion in red lipstick. A hurricane wrapped in fishnets. She had no backup plan, no safety net, no one waiting at home. Just a voice in her head whispering, "Don't stop, not until the world knows who the hell you are." And so, she didn't. Madonna's first role wasn't on a stage. It was in that room where she auditioned not for a part, but for her right to exist on her own terms. And from that moment on, she wouldn't ask for space. She'd take it. Material girl, spiritual hoe. They called her a material girl. But no one asked what she was made of. The charts loved her. The crowds worshipped her. The cameras couldn't get enough. And yet, when the lights dimmed and the doors closed, Madonna sat alone, in silence, with a hunger that no applause could feed. It was 1984. Like a virgin had exploded across the world. She wasn't just famous, she was everywhere. Magazine covers, radio waves, fashion, film. Every inch of her had been dissected, commercialized, copied. She had what they all wanted. And still, she felt empty. In hotel rooms that smelled like fresh linen and loneliness, she would lie awake and stare at the ceiling. No noise, just a ringing echo of 1,000 cheers she could no longer hear. Because it didn't matter how many people screamed her name. If none of them knew her soul, they thought they saw her. But they only saw the armor, the lace gloves, the red lipstick, the attitude, the girl who danced on stage like she feared nothing. But they didn't see her doubts, her childhood wounds, the pieces of her that still belonged to Madonna Louise Ciccone, not the icon the world had created. She called her father once, from Tokyo, told him she was tired. He said, "Of what? You're living your dream." She didn't know how to say, I'm not sure if the dream is mine anymore. Because here's the thing about fame no one tells you. It doesn't fill you, it distorts you. Suddenly your reflection isn't yours. You belong to everyone and no one. The girl from Michigan, who used to scribble poetry in journals and pray under her breath, had become an empire. But inside the empire was a woman aching for meaning. So she started searching, not in interviews, not in nightclubs, not in money or men, but in books, in meditation, in silence. She read about mysticism, Buddhism, Catholic guilt, Kabbalah, because something inside her whispered, what's the point of being adored if you can't feel it? And so, while the world danced to her hits, Madonna was building a second stage, one the cameras couldn't see, a place for her thoughts, her pain, her truth. The world had given her everything, but the one thing it couldn't give her was peace. So she went looking for it, not in spotlights, but in shadows. Like a prayer, like a protest. She didn't go to war with religion. She went to war with what they did to her, in its name. It started with silence, not the kind you choose, but the kind that's forced upon you. Madonna was 5 years old when her mother died. Cancer, they said. God's plan, they whispered. But no one explained why a loving God would take away a child's only source of warmth. No one held her long enough to silence the ache. No one answered her questions. They just asked her to pray. So she did. She folded her small hands, knelt before a cross, and cried not because she believed, but because she had no one left to ask. Years later, that same girl would stand beneath spotlights instead of stained glass, not to worship, but to demand answers, and the world wasn't ready. In 1989, she released Like a Prayer. It wasn't just a pop single, it was a sacred rebellion. A woman in lingerie and a crucifix, dancing in a church, kissing a black saint, burning crosses in the night. The headline screamed, blasphemy, disgrace, heretic. The Vatican condemned her. Pepsi pulled a $5 million sponsorship deal. She was banned in countries that once blasted her voice from every radio. But she didn't apologize. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. Because this wasn't just a performance. It was a confrontation, a reckoning. The imagery wasn't meant to provoke. It was meant to reflect. Racism, police brutality, religious hypocrisy. She wasn't mocking God. She was asking, where was he when her mother died, when women were silenced, when injustice wore a badge? Behind the veil of controversy, Madonna was bleeding not for spectacle, but for truth. She remembered Sunday mornings, tight white gloves, Catholic hymns echoing off cold walls. She remembered confessionals that felt like cages, guilt that was fed to girls like communion. And she remembered being told that her body was dangerous, her thoughts were impure, and that a good woman kept quiet. But Madonna didn't keep quiet. She turned the altar into a stage. She turned guilt into choreography. And she sang not to seduce, but to survive. The backlash was vicious. Religious leaders called for boycotts. Churches held protests. She received death threats wrapped in scripture. And through it all, she stood taller. In interviews, they asked, "Don't you think you've gone too far?" She answered, "I don't think I've gone far enough." Because she knew something the world refused to see. That faith and femininity don't have to be enemies. That a woman could love God and question him. That holiness wasn't about shame. It was about freedom. In private, though, she wasn't always so sure. She would sit alone in her dressing room after shows. The eyeliner smudged, the wig pulled off, the silence creeping back in. And sometimes, just for a moment, she missed the pew. The simplicity of believing in something bigger, of surrendering. But then she'd remember. She was never allowed to bring her full self into that space, only her silence. So she built her own church, with lights instead of candles, lyrics instead of liturgy, and a congregation of the unheard. Like a prayer became more than song. It became a mirror held up to a world that preached love, but punished difference. It topped the charts. It sold millions. It broke rules. It bent expectations. But most of all, it gave a voice to those who had none. Years later, critics would still argue, was it too much? Too political? Too dangerous? But Madonna didn't care. Because for that 5-year-old girl inside her, the one who knelt and wept and waited for answers that never came, this was healing. This was justice. This was her amen. A mother on stage, a child at home. She was the most photographed woman in the world. But her children didn't want the flash. They just wanted her face. Madonna became a mother at 38, older than most, but not too late for the woman who'd spent her whole life reinventing time. She had conquered stages, awards, borders, and now, for the first time, she held something that didn't want to worship her, just hold her hand. Her daughter, Lourdes, was born in 1996, and with her came a silence Madonna hadn't known before. Not the silence of empty hotel rooms, not the silence after an arena show, but the silence of nursery at 3 a.m. when no one is watching, and nothing matters except the way your baby breathes. For the first time in decades, she was still, and that stillness terrified her. She had built her life on motion, tour after tour, album after album, shock, scream, repeat. But motherhood doesn't care about spotlight. It demands presence, not performance, tenderness, not control. And for someone like Madonna, who had survived by armoring up, this was disarming. She would rock her baby girl with tired arms, and in the quiet hum of a lullaby, feel the weight of all the things she never received from her own mother. There was no blueprint for this, no rehearsal, no choreography, just raw, terrifying love. But even as she whispered to her daughter, the world was shouting, will she slow down? Can she still be sexy? Is she too old now? Because fame doesn't let you change. It demands the same version of you, forever young, forever bold, forever available. So Madonna split herself in two. By day, a mother, warm, alert, learning how to surrender. By night, a performer, fierce, untouchable, reclaiming space. But in between those hours, a woman quietly falling apart. She would fly across continents with one hand holding a mic and the other clutching a baby bottle. Jet lag mixed with breast pumps, sound checks scheduled around naps, and guilt, so much guilt, because every moment on stage meant a moment missed at home. Every encore, a bedtime story not read. Once, backstage before a major show, Lourdes tugged at her dress and asked, "Mommy, why can't you stay with me tonight?" Madonna's throat tightened. What could she say? That millions were waiting outside? That the world needed her? No, only one person mattered in that moment. She knelt, looked into her daughter's eyes, and whispered, "I'll never stop coming back to you." But the truth? She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep cures. The kind that comes from splitting your soul in half every day. From trying to prove to the world that you can be everything. And fearing you're not enough for anyone. As her children grew, they began to resist the fame. They didn't want cameras. They didn't want headlines. They wanted her. The version that wasn't wearing glitter. And sometimes she didn't know where that version had gone. In one interview, she said, "Being a mother is the hardest thing I've ever done, because the world doesn't want me to be soft, but my children do." Still, she tried. She brought them on tour. She wrote them letters from hotel rooms. She meditated. She journaled. She prayed. But the ache never left. The ache of loving something so deeply and never being sure if you're doing it right. This wasn't the kind of pain you could put in a song. It was too quiet, too sacred, so she carried it, like a second heart, beating beneath the beat. Because at the end of the day, beneath the lace, the headlines, the armor, she was just a woman, trying to raise light in a world that worshipped shadows. She danced with death and Botox. She wasn't afraid of getting old. She was afraid of becoming invisible. The stage had always welcomed her. But as the years passed, the camera became cruel. In her 20s, they called her daring. In her 30s, provocative. In her 40s, resilient. But in her 50s, desperate. That's the word they used. Not because her art changed, but because her age did. Madonna was 50 years old, still selling out stadiums, still outdancing women half her age. But the headlines weren't about her music anymore. They were about her face, her arms, her outfits, her skin. She once said, "If I were a man, I'd be called a legend, but as a woman, I'm called a trying too hard has been." She knew the numbers. She wasn't blind. In Hollywood, men age into depth. Women age into disappearance. At 25, she was a goddess. At 55, she was a punchline. And so she fought back, not with silence, but with scalpels and serums. Botox, fillers, facelifts. She didn't hide it. She didn't pretend. But behind the procedures wasn't just vanity. There was fear. Fear of fading. Fear of no longer being seen. Fear that the world would love her only if she stayed frozen in time. She looked in the mirror and didn't always recognize herself. Not because of the work done, but because she didn't know what the world expected anymore. To be young, to be wise, to be quiet, no one could answer. But everyone had an opinion. She received messages like, "You used to be beautiful. Grow old gracefully. Stop trying." But they never said that to Mick Jagger, or Paul McCartney, or Bruce Springsteen, because aging in a man was called dignity. In a woman, it was called denial. But Madonna never asked for dignity. She asked for freedom, the freedom to age or not, to dance or sit still, to evolve on her terms. In one interview, a journalist asked, "Don't you think you should just let go?" She stared at him, long, unblinking, and said, "Let go of what? My voice, my power, my body, or just your expectations?" Still in private, the fear crept in. When the stadium lights went out, when the fans left, when the makeup came off, she sat with the truth no one else could see, that sometimes, even the strongest women just want to feel held. She wrote in her journal, "They say I'm too old, but I've never felt more awake. They say I should stop, but they don't know what it cost me to keep going." Her body had become a battlefield. Every wrinkle, a war. Every line, a headline. Every choice, a trial. But she kept dancing, not because she was fearless, but because she was defiant. She danced for the woman who was told to cover up, for the mother who couldn't wear red lipstick, for the girl who lost her mother too soon and had to grow up without ever learning how to soften. She wasn't trying to stay young. She was trying to stay present, to say, "I'm still here, and I still matter." The world called it a midlife crisis, but it wasn't a crisis. It was a resurrection. The mirror lied, the soul didn't. She was everywhere, billboards, covers, screens. But the one place she struggled to exist was in the mirror. They told her who she was. A queen, a rebel, a witch, a whore, a mother, a mistake, a miracle. The world had 1,000 names for Madonna, but none of them were hers. She stood in her dressing room one night, post-show sweat still clinging to her skin, makeup melting, adrenaline fading, and there it was again, the mirror, always there, always waiting, always asking, "Who are you when no one's watching?" The truth? She didn't know anymore. She had become a projection. A sculpture carved by photographers, fans, critics, lovers, enemies. 1,000 opinions stitched together, pixel by pixel. But inside was a woman who never stopped being that little girl, aching for her mother's touch, aching to just be seen for real. The mirror showed a body, a shape, a product, but it didn't show her grief. It didn't show how she cried after interviews, how she sometimes woke up in hotel rooms and forgot which country she was in or why she was even there. She once told a friend backstage, "Everyone wants a piece of me, and some days, I don't even know if I have anything left." On stage, she was untouchable, but in hotel hallways, she was just a woman, carrying shoes in her hands because the heels hurt too much. She had tried therapy. It helped until the therapist asked, "What would happen if you stopped being Madonna for a day?" She laughed, but not because it was funny, because it was terrifying. She didn't know who she was without the name. She had crafted her image like armor, lace leather, power. Every reinvention, a new layer, a new wall. But after decades, the walls started to creak, and she could hear something behind them, her own voice, small, afraid, still there. It whispered, "You don't have to be spectacular every second. You're allowed to be soft. You're allowed to not be okay." But the world didn't want her soft. It wanted her iconic. So she kept painting on the face, kept tightening the corset, kept giving the audience what they came for. But it cost her. Late at night, she would journal, not as Madonna, just as M. She'd write lines like, "I miss silence. I miss not being watched. I miss me." She tried to find herself in her children's laughter, in Kabbalah texts, in yoga, in moments on her farm where the only sound was wind, but it never fully returned, that sense of wholeness. Because when you spend decades being what everyone else needs, you forget what you need. Sometimes she'd look at her reflection and see pieces of all the women she had been, the club girl, the pop star, the scandal, the savior, the sinner, and yet none of them felt complete. The mirror showed a face, but never the fight behind it. Never the nights she stayed up worrying if the audience would still show. Never the pressure of carrying a legacy on shoulders that just wanted to rest. Never the quiet heartbreak of watching people love a version of you that you outgrew years ago. One day, she smashed a mirror in her tour bathroom. No rage, no drama, just silence, glass everywhere, and a sigh. "I'm done trying to see myself through their eyes." From that day on, she stopped trying to be timeless. She started trying to be truthful, not beautiful, not ageless, not flawless, just real. And for the first time in decades, she started to find peace, not in the mirror, but in the space behind it, the space where she could finally say, "I'm not who they say I am. I'm not even who I said I was. I'm just someone trying to survive and stay human in a world that loves masks." Queen of reinvention, prisoner of image. They call her a master of reinvention, but no one asks what it costs her to keep becoming someone new, just to survive. Madonna was always ahead of her time, not because she had a plan, but because she never stopped running from the past, from expectations, from labels, from the idea that a woman could be one thing, and only one thing forever. So she changed, again, and again, and again. The media called it genius. Fans called it evolution. Critics called it marketing. But inside, it was survival. Each transformation wasn't about fashion or fame. It was a shield, a strategy, a way to stay visible in a world that kept trying to erase her. Or worse, trap her in who she used to be. In the 80s, she was a virgin and the vamp. In the 90s, the dominatrix and the mystic. In the 2000s, the yoga mother and the political prophet. Every decade brought a new version, a new headline, a new fight. But behind the glamour, there was always the same quiet question echoing. Will they still love me if I stay the same? So she didn't stay the same. She reinvented, like a magician pulling fire from her chest, like a woman refusing to be buried while still breathing. But after a while, the mask began to feel like skin, and she couldn't tell where Madonna ended, and the image began. She once said in a documentary, "I create a monster, and now I have to feed it every single day." Because the world didn't want the real her. It wanted the next her, not the tired woman behind the curtain, but the phoenix on stage. And the pressure was crushing. She would finish a tour, collapse from exhaustion, barely able to speak, and before she could recover, the industry would ask, "So what's next?" No space to breathe, no time to grieve, just another album, another look, another persona. The crown was never taken from her, but the weight of it, it dug into her skull. She started to question everything. Was this freedom, or was it a prison made of gold and sequins? Was she growing, or just mutating to please a crowd that never stopped clapping long enough to listen? Sometimes she would stare at old photographs, see the girl with the gap-toothed smile, the one who moved to New York with nothing but hunger and hurt, and she'd whisper, "Where did she go?" The public saw confidence, power, control, but in her journals, she wrote things like, "I'm tired of being interesting. I wish I could just be. I don't want to impress anymore. I want to belong." Because no one tells you. When you become a brand, you start to lose your body. You become an idea, a product, a commodity, and you begin to wonder if you stripped it all away, the costumes, the edits, the iconography, would anything remain? She craved intimacy, not sex, not fame, real connection, a conversation without cameras, a dinner without judgment, a day without makeup, a mirror that didn't demand answers. But reinvention doesn't pause. It consumes. And Madonna had become both the queen and the servant of her own myth. In interviews, she would smile, make bold statements, shock, command, dazzle. But inside, she often felt like a woman performing herself for a world that loved her more the less they actually knew her. And yet, she kept going, not because she loved the spotlight, but because she feared what waited in the dark. Because when your entire life is built on being seen, what happens when they stop looking? She once wrote, "Maybe I was never free. Maybe I was just a beautiful hostage, with a microphone instead of chains." The last confession, she built a stage high enough to be seen by the world. But sometimes she just wanted someone to climb up and sit beside her. The arena was full, tens of thousands, screaming, dancing, crying. And there she stood, center stage, lights raining down. Decades of sound behind her, but inside it was quiet. For the first time in years, truly quiet. She closed her eyes, not to soak in the applause, not to strike a pose, but to finally hear herself. For too long, her life had been noise, interviews, headlines, rumors, lovers, lawsuits, fans, critics, a symphony of voices, none of them hers. And now, in this final moment, she whispered, not into a mic, but into her own soul, "I'm still here. I made it, but I'm so tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of being provocative. Tired of pretending she wasn't afraid." She had danced through grief, through heartbreak, through shame and sickness and surgeries. She had lost friends to AIDS, lovers to betrayal, herself, more times than she could count. But the world never saw that. The world saw outfits, controversy, comebacks, but they never saw her crying in the hotel bathroom, wiping off mascara that wasn't waterproof, talking to a god she wasn't sure existed anymore. She had become a symbol, a brand, a revolution. But tonight, she wanted to be just a woman. She remembered lured tiny hands, wrapped around her finger, her son's drawings taped to fridge, the letters she wrote them from hotel rooms, signed not as Madonna, but simply Mom. She thought about her mother, the one taken too soon, the one who never saw her daughter light up the world. She hoped she'd be proud, not of the fame, but of the fight. The stage lights dimmed, her body older, her voice raspier, but her fire still there. She walked toward the edge of the stage, looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time in her career, she didn't perform. She just stood there, real, raw, unarmored, and said, barely above a whisper, "Thank you, not for loving the image, but for staying long enough to maybe love the woman behind it." There was no beat, no dancers, no pyrotechnics, just her, bathed in a single light. And when she turned to walk off stage, the crowd didn't scream. They stood in silence because somehow they understood this wasn't an ending. It was a release. Backstage, alone, she looked in the mirror one last time. No makeup, no filter, no mask, just a reflection. Older, wiser, softer, and for once, she didn't criticize it. She smiled, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, for herself, because after everything, every headline, every reinvention, every scar, she had finally become someone no one could take from her, herself.